The Chosen One. The storm raged inside you, an invisible war between what you were taught to believe and what your soul has begun to whisper. You stand still, yet your spirit trembles. There is a voice, subtle but steady, echoing from a place beyond reason. It says, "You were not born to chase. You were born to awaken." Everything you once trusted, work, effort, the struggle for approval, suddenly feels hollow. You try to silence the thought, to return to the safety of what you know, but something greater keeps pulling you back. It feels divine, unsettling, and inescapably real. You begin to realize that perhaps every disappointment, every closed door, was never rejection. It was redirection, a cosmic alignment leading you to this exact moment. The silence grows heavier. The world around you continues to move, but you feel the stillness between breaths, the sacred pause before revelation. This is where your journey begins, not in action, but in awakening. You were told to fight for your place, to earn your worth, to prove your value. But what if worth was never meant to be earned? What if your existence itself is proof enough? The truth rises slowly within you like dawn after endless night. You are not your job, not your status, not your failures. You are a purpose, clothed in flesh. And yet, you resist. You ask, why me? Why would God choose someone so uncertain, so imperfect, so full of doubt? But that is precisely why. The chosen ones are never the flawless. They are the fractured souls who learn to let light seep through the cracks. Your doubt is not a weakness, it is the trembling doorway through which faith must pass. You start to remember moments when time stood still, when something greater seemed to guide you, a stranger's words that pierced your heart, an event that felt too precise to be coincidence. These were not random. They were whispers of alignment, signs that the invisible hand of destiny has always been near. Still, you question. You look around and see others chasing, achieving, building walls of certainty while you dismantle your own. The temptation to return to the comfort of the familiar grows stronger. To follow the crowd would be easier. But something inside refuses to be silenced. It says, you were not made to fit in. You were made to be found. You are caught between two worlds, the noise of the masses and the quiet call of heaven. And in that tension, your purpose is forged. You begin to understand that this calling is not a task, but a transformation. It is not about changing your life. It is about remembering who you truly are beneath the layers of fear and expectation. You breathe deeply. For the first time, you feel the weight of everything you tried to carry, and then, the slow release of surrender. You realize that surrender is not giving up, but giving in to the current that has always been leading you home. In this surrender, something shifts. A stillness turns into strength. A whisper becomes a command. Walk your path, not theirs. The moment you stop chasing what was never meant for you, the doors meant for you begin to open effortlessly. The more you trust, the clearer your purpose becomes. Not through striving, but through listening. Not through force, but through faith. You begin to see that the divine plan was never about survival. It was always about awakening. You were not sent here to labor in fear, but to live in flow. Not to chase after blessings, but to realize that you are the blessing. The wind outside softens. The storm that once raged within turns into a quiet rhythm. It feels like peace, not the kind that comes from control, but from connection. You close your eyes and whisper, almost afraid to believe it. Maybe I was chosen for this after all. And as you whisper, a subtle knowing fills the room. Every cell in your body begins to remember. The light you thought you lost was never gone. It was waiting for your permission to return. You are the vessel, the message, the miracle. The question is no longer whether you are ready. The question is whether you are willing to answer the call that has been echoing all along. Because once you say yes, everything changes. The world does not become easier, but you become unbreakable. The path does not clear, but you begin to see in the dark. And perhaps that is the true definition of faith, to walk through uncertainty, trusting that every step is already written in light. If this truth stirs something inside you, if it reminds you of who you truly are, write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The storm may have begun in chaos, but what follows will be your awakening. And in the silence after the storm, a single phrase lingers in your heart. The chosen one has finally remembered. The chosen one. The night felt endless. The silence heavier than the air itself. You stood before the mirror, watching your own reflection tremble, wondering if you had imagined everything. The voice, the calling, the certainty, it all seemed so distant now. Faith, once a bright flame, flickered under the wind of doubt. You whispered to yourself, was it real? Or was I just trying to give meaning to my confusion? The question echoed through your mind like a cold wind passing through hollow walls. You wanted to believe you were chosen. You wanted to believe there was a purpose behind the chaos. But reality pressed hard against your chest bills, expectations, the opinions of others. Every time you tried to rise, life seemed to push you back down. You began to wonder if the divine plan you once trusted was just another illusion. The world around you moved on effortlessly. People smiled, posted their successes, pretended to know where they were going, and there you were, standing in the middle of uncertainty, your heart torn between surrender and rebellion. You prayed, but sometimes your prayers felt unanswered. You asked for signs, but silence came instead. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there was still that faint pulse, the same quiet knowing that had called you once before. But you doubted even that. You thought, maybe I was never chosen. Maybe I was just naive enough to believe that my life could mean more. The weight of that thought crushed you for days. You stopped seeking signs. You stopped praying. You decided to return to the logic of the world, to the comfort of the ordinary. But the ordinary no longer fit you. It was like trying to breathe underwater. You took the job, followed the schedule, smiled when expected, but every night, the silence returned. Every night, your soul whispered, this is not where you belong. The crisis deepened. Faith became a battlefield. On one side stood reason, cold and certain. On the other, a whisper, fragile but eternal. You found yourself asking questions you once feared to speak aloud. If God chose me, why do I feel abandoned? If I am meant for greatness, why do I keep falling? And perhaps, in that moment of complete honesty, something began to shift again. Because faith is not the absence of doubt, it is the courage to keep walking even when doubt screams louder than belief. You started to notice something strange, how every fall seemed to teach you something invisible, how every delay protected you from something unseen, how even your pain had rhythm, as if guided by unseen hands. It was as if the silence itself was speaking to you, saying, you are not forgotten, you are being refined. Still, the struggle did not end. One night, in the quiet hours when sleep refused to come, you felt a wave of anger rise. You spoke to the ceiling as if it could hear you. If you are there, show me something. Anything. I'm tired of believing in a plan I cannot see. Tears blurred your vision, and for a moment, you felt foolish talking to the unseen, demanding proof from the infinite. But as the tears fell, something inside you broke not your faith, but your illusion of control. And in that breaking, something sacred entered. A memory surfaced, a moment from years ago when you were at your lowest, yet somehow you made it through. You remembered the quiet strength that came from nowhere, the peace that shouldn't have existed. You realized that perhaps faith had never left you, it had simply changed shape. You began to understand that being chosen does not mean being spared from pain. It means being trusted to find light in the darkest corners. You wiped your face and whispered again, this time not in demand, but in surrender. If this is the process, I'll stay. The wind outside shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no miracle, just a soft change in the air, as if the universe exhaled with you. You realized that perhaps the true crisis of faith is not losing belief, but losing patience. You wanted clarity, but you were being taught trust. You wanted a destination, but you were being shaped for the journey. And deep down, you began to feel something awakening again. A spark not of certainty, but of quiet resilience. You are not failing. You are being formed. The divine doesn't rush. It refines. And every unanswered prayer is a sculptor's chisel against the marble of your destiny. As you sat in that silence, your heartbeat steadied. You didn't have all the answers, but you had peace. And sometimes, that is enough to keep moving. For faith is not a straight path. It bends, it breaks, it rebuilds. And somewhere within that chaos, the chosen learn how to see with their soul. The night began to fade into the pale light of dawn, and as the first ray touched your face, you realized you had not lost your faith. You had just met it for the first time, stripped of illusion, pure and unshakable. You whispered softly to the morning, maybe this is how belief is born, not in certainty, but in surrender. And in that moment, you felt it again, the presence. Quiet, patient, eternal, waiting for your yes. Because only those who have doubted deeply can ever believe completely. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. For your darkness is not a punishment, it is preparation. And somewhere beyond this night, destiny waits. The chosen one, the world had gone quiet. But the silence was not peace, it was pressure. You walked through days that felt hollow, as if life had been stripped of color. People spoke, but their words drifted through you like wind through a broken window. Somewhere deep within, something still called your name, but you could no longer tell if it was divine guidance or the echo of your own longing. You moved through the motions, smiling when needed, nodding when expected, but the wilderness had already begun. Not the wilderness of sand or stone, but of the soul. The kind where every truth you once held begins to dissolve, and you are left standing with nothing but questions. At night, you lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the silence meant abandonment or preparation. You remembered the promise, the sense of calling that once felt so vivid, and asked yourself, what if I misheard it? But even in your wandering, the signs began to appear, subtle at first, like whispers that brushed past the edges of thought. A number repeating on clocks, a song playing at the right moment, a stranger saying words that pierced your heart. It was as if the universe, in its infinite patience, was trying to speak to you in the language of coincidence, and yet, doubt shadowed every sign. You wanted confirmation, not poetry. You wanted proof, not mystery. Still, the voice persisted, not loud, not commanding, but steady like water carving stone. It said, "Stop searching for the way. You are the way." You froze when that thought entered. It didn't sound like arrogance, it sounded like truth. A truth you weren't ready to hold. You thought purpose was something distant, a hidden treasure you had to earn. But what if it was already within you, waiting for you to stop running? The wilderness grew darker. Days blended into nights, and nights into reflection. You began to see your patterns, the need to control, the fear of losing direction, the desperate grasp for certainty. You realized these were not signs of faith, but signs of fear. And then, one evening, something shifted. You went for a walk under a dim sky, the streets empty, your thoughts louder than your steps. You passed by a church, its doors half open, the faint glow of candles flickering inside. You hesitated, then stepped in. It wasn't about religion, it was about presence. The still air wrapped around you. The scent of wax and dust felt ancient, almost sacred. You sat in the last pew, your head bowed low, not knowing what to say. And then the voice returned, not from above, not from the altar, but from within. "Do you trust me even when you cannot see me?" You didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was complicated. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. The voice continued, "Faith that sees is not faith. Faith that waits in silence is what transforms." You sat there, letting the words sink in. You realized you had been treating faith like a contract if you believed. Then you expected proof. But faith was never a transaction. It was a relationship, and like all sacred relationships, it required surrender. You closed your eyes and breathed deeply. For a moment, everything faded. The worry, the striving, the noise. All that remained was that quiet hum of something greater, weaving itself through your soul. And then came the memory of a dream you once had, but forgot, a dream where you stood in a desert, holding a single lantern. The darkness stretched endlessly, but the light in your hand was enough to take one more step. You remembered now. That was the lesson. The light does not remove the dark. It simply shows you where to place your foot next. The wilderness, you realized, was never punishment, it was preparation. It stripped you of everything false so that only truth could remain. It took away the noise so that you could finally hear the whisper. When you left the church, the air outside felt different, still cold, but alive. The streetlights flickered like silent witnesses, and in that dim light, something rose within you, not clarity, but peace. You understood that purpose isn't a single revelation, it's a continuous unfolding. Each moment, each encounter, each challenge is another word in the divine sentence written for your life. And perhaps the wilderness itself was God's way of speaking to you in solitude, away from the distractions of the world. Because some truths can only be heard in silence. You looked up at the sky, the stars hidden behind clouds, and smiled. You didn't need to see them to know they were there. That you realized, was faith. You whispered softly, "Even in the wilderness, I will listen." And somewhere, in that quiet space between heaven and earth, something listened back. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, for even in the wilderness, the voice never leaves you. It waits for you to stop running, to finally hear the truth that was always there. You were never lost. You were being led, and the path ahead, though still hidden, begins to glow faintly. A light just bright enough for the next step. The chosen one. The fire did not begin outside of you. It began within. Quiet at first, a tremor, a flicker, a whisper that refused to die. You tried to smother it with logic, drown it in distraction, bury it beneath the weight of obligation. But the more you resisted, the stronger it burned. There comes a moment in every chosen life when comfort becomes unbearable, when the cage of familiarity feels too small for the spirit that has begun to awaken. You had reached that moment. The walls of your old self began to crack, and through those cracks, light entered like fire. At first, it terrified you. Change always does, because transformation does not begin with beauty, it begins with breaking. It demands that you surrender what no longer serves you, even when it once felt essential. The friendships built on fear, the ambitions born of comparison, the dreams that were never yours to carry, one by one, they began to fall away. You tried to hold on. You fought the process. You asked, "Why must everything I love be stripped away?" And the voice replied softly, "Because I am making space for what is eternal." Still, it hurt. The fire always does. It burns through illusions, attachments, and false identities until only truth remains. You wanted to believe that being chosen meant being protected from pain, but now you understood it meant being purified by it. You began to notice how every ending carried a strange beauty, like the last note of a song lingering in the air. Loss was not punishment, it was invitation. It was the universe's way of saying, "Trust me with the space you cannot fill." Days turned into nights of questioning, nights into mornings of quiet surrender. You learned that transformation is not about becoming something new, it is about remembering what has always been inside you. The fire was not here to destroy you, it was here to reveal you. You started to see how pain had purpose. Each scar carried wisdom. Each disappointment hid a divine correction. Even the betrayals were blessings in disguise, reminders that no human rejection could cancel your divine direction. And yet, you still wavered. There were moments when the fire felt too strong, when the heat of transformation made you long for the cool shadows of your old life. But every time you looked back, the path had disappeared. The only way was forward. The fire consumed the illusions of control. You had always believed you were the one shaping your destiny, but now you saw that destiny was shaping you. It was not about effort, it was about alignment, not about striving, but surrendering. There were days when you felt empty, the old identity gone, the new one not yet formed. It felt like death, but it was rebirth. The silence was the space where your soul was being rewritten. And then, one evening, standing by a window as rain whispered against the glass, something stirred inside you, a sense of peace you could not explain. You realized that you were no longer fighting the fire, you were breathing with it. Each inhale a prayer, each exhale a release. You saw that everything that had been taken was not lost, only transformed. Every ending was an alchemy, every surrender a seed. The things you thought would break you had become the very tools of your awakening. The fire had not come to destroy it, had come to refine. In that moment, you remembered an ancient truth, whispered across ages: gold is purified not by preservation, but by flame. So too is the soul. You began to understand that faith without fire is fragile. Belief that has never been tested cannot hold the weight of destiny. You were being forged into something unshakable, something eternal. Still, there was fear. There always is. But fear, you learned, is not the absence of faith. It is its birthplace. So you stood before the invisible furnace of your becoming, trembling but willing. You whispered to the fire, "Do what you must, but do not leave me as I was." And in that surrender, you felt the shift, the energy of alignment moving through your spirit. Every pain you had resisted became power. Every doubt turned into direction. You were no longer a victim of your story, you were the author awakening to the pen in your hand. The fire burned away the need to be understood, the craving to be liked, the dependence on outcomes. You no longer needed validation, you needed truth. And as the flames subsided, what remained was something radiant, indestructible, unafraid. You were not who you were before. You had become the very light you were seeking. The wilderness had purified you. The silence had strengthened you. And the fire had revealed you. Now you understood. The chosen are not crowned in comfort. They are forged in flame. So when the next trial comes, you will not ask, "Why me?" You will whisper, "Use me," because transformation is not a moment, it is a movement of the soul. And every time you rise from the ashes, the universe whispers again, "You are closer now." Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. The fire may have burned away what you thought you needed, but it has left behind what you truly are, pure light. And soon, that light will call forth everything meant for you, because the next chapter of your awakening has already begun. The chosen one, when the fire faded, you thought peace would come. But peace did not come right away. What came instead was reflection, a mirror so clear that you could no longer hide from yourself. You looked into it and saw not who you wanted to be, but who you truly were. Every wound, every lie you told yourself, every part of you that begged for love yet feared it at the same time, the mirror showed it all. And for the first time, you didn't turn away. You realized that transformation is not complete when the fire ends. It continues in the quiet that follows. Because when everything external has been stripped away, all that remains is the truth within. At first, it was unbearable. You saw the masks you had worn, the roles you played to be accepted, the identities built on other people's expectations. You saw how much of your energy had been spent chasing validation from a world that could never truly see you. And yet, the mirror did not judge. It only reflected. It whispered, "This is who you have been, but not who you must remain." That whisper carried weight, because it meant responsibility. The divine calling you once romanticized now felt heavier, no longer a destiny to admire, but a duty to embody. You began to understand that being chosen was never about privilege. It was about purpose. You stood before that inner mirror day after day, facing the light and the shadow. Some days you felt divine. Other days you felt unworthy, broken, undone. But every day, you stayed. You faced yourself without turning away. And then, something extraordinary began to happen. You noticed that the more you accepted your flaws, the more they lost their power over you. Shame turned into understanding. Guilt became guidance. The very parts of you you once despised began to reveal their sacred purpose. Your insecurities were not your enemies, they were messages. Each one carried the story of a lesson you had resisted. Each one pointed to a place in your heart that longed for healing. You realized that light does not destroy darkness, it embraces it until it becomes light too. That revelation shook you. It meant that you no longer had to fight yourself. You could love every version of you that had ever existed. The one who doubted, the one who failed, the one who was still learning. It was in that compassion that your power returned. Because divine power is not control, it is acceptance. You remembered the nights you begged for signs. You realized now that God had not been silent. The mirror had been the sign all along. The reflection staring back at you was not a stranger. It was the divine wearing your face. You had been searching for a savior outside of yourself, not realizing that the same light you prayed to was already within you. You whispered to your reflection, "You are not the storm you survived. You are the calm that came after." The tears that fell were not of sorrow, but of release. You were finally free, not because you had escaped your pain, but because you had made peace with it. In that moment of surrender, the mirror changed. It no longer showed a fragmented soul, but a being whole and radiant. You saw in your eyes a softness you had never noticed before, the look of someone who had faced death and chosen life again. And then another truth surfaced. You realized that what you saw in yourself, you would begin to see in others. The divine mirror was not only within you, it reflected through everything around you. The people who hurt you became teachers. The moments that broke you became doorways. Every interaction, every challenge, every delay became a reflection of your inner world, inviting you to rise higher. You began to see how the universe is always mirroring your vibration, your thoughts, your energy. When you move from fear, the world reflects chaos. When you move from love, the world reflects harmony. And so, your task became clear: to guard your inner mirror, to keep it polished with awareness, forgiveness, and gratitude. You learned that healing is not an event, but a practice. Every time you choose compassion over judgment, light over bitterness, you polish the mirror. Every time you forgive yourself for being human, you align more deeply with the divine. And soon, the reflection you once feared became your greatest teacher. It reminded you daily, you are not separate from the light. You are its vessel. You began to carry yourself differently, not in pride, but in quiet certainty. The storms of others no longer pulled you under. The noise of the world no longer dictated your peace. You had become still inside, and in that stillness, something miraculous happened. You began to attract not what you wanted, but what aligned with who you had become. People, opportunities, insights, they all started to appear effortlessly, like pieces falling into divine order. You realize that this is how creation works, not through struggle, but through reflection. The outer world simply mirrors the truth you carry within. The mirror had done its work. You no longer sought validation. You sought alignment, and as you looked one last time at your reflection, you saw not a seeker, but a creator. Not a victim, but a vessel. You whispered softly, "I am ready to reflect the divine." And as the words left your lips, the mirror shimmered with light, then disappeared, because it was no longer needed. The reflection had become the reality. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. You are no longer who you were. You are no longer searching. You have become what you once sought. The divine mirror has revealed the truth. You were never meant to find God. You were meant to remember that you are made of God. And soon, the world will see that light shining through you. The chosen one. The dawn came quietly, not with thunder, but with breath. The world outside your window still shimmered with dew, but something within you had already shifted. You felt it, the quiet rhythm of truth pulsing through your veins, the peace that once seemed distant, now alive beneath your skin. You were no longer chasing signs, because you had become one. Everything that had once felt like struggle now revealed its meaning. The nights of confusion, the wilderness, the fire, the mirror, all of it had been preparation, not punishment. Not delay, preparation for this moment of awakening. You stood in silence, but your soul was singing, a song without sound, woven from the threads of everything you had overcome. It was a melody of remembrance of who you are and who you were always meant to be. You began to realize that awakening is not a single revelation, it is the continuous recognition of the divine within the ordinary, the sacred hidden inside the simple. You looked at your hands, your breath, your heartbeat, and whispered, "I am still here." And for the first time, here was enough. You remembered the weight you once carried, the endless striving, the desperate reaching for a future that never arrived. You used to think purpose was somewhere far ahead, waiting to be discovered. But now you saw that it had been with you from the beginning, quietly unfolding with every choice, every mistake, every prayer whispered in the dark. You understood now. The divine plan is not written in the sky, it is written through you. You felt it when you failed and stood again. You heard it when silence answered your prayer. You saw it when endings led to beginnings you never expected. The universe had not been cruel, it had been exact. Every delay was protection. Every heartbreak was redirection. Every loss was sacred subtraction, removing what blocked your light. And now that the illusions had burned away, you could finally see. You realize that awakening does not make you separate from the world, it makes you more connected to it. You no longer walk above life, you walk within it, carrying stillness into the noise, light into the shadows, grace into the ordinary moments others overlook. That was the secret all along. Heaven was never somewhere else. It was hidden in each moment you dared to be fully present. You began to move differently. Each step, a prayer. Each breath, a reminder. You were no longer trying to reach something divine, you were embodying it. People noticed. Some were drawn to your calm, others unsettled by it. The light you carry will always reveal both admiration and resistance. But you no longer needed to be understood. You were no longer performing, you were radiating. You began to speak differently. Not with the need to convince, but with the peace of one who has seen beyond the veil. You realize that your mission is not to change others, it is to awaken them by being the living proof that change is possible. The world around you still moved in chaos, but you no longer feared it. You had learned that storms do not come to destroy, they come to clear what no longer belongs. The same fire that once burned you now warmed those around you. You were no longer seeking divine guidance, you were becoming it. And in that realization, you felt something infinite expand inside your chest. A love too vast to describe, too holy to contain. The kind of love that does not demand it, simply is. You understood then that awakening is not about escape, it is about return. Return to simplicity, to presence, to trust. Return to the awareness that you were never separate from God, only distracted. You looked back on your journey, the questions, the falls, the surrender, and whispered a truth that only the awakened can understand. Every shadow was sacred, every silence was guidance. The light in you now burned steady, not loud, not wild, but eternal. And as you stood at the edge of your new beginning, the voice returned. The same one that had called you in the storm, guided you through the fire, and whispered through the wilderness. It said, "Now that you have remembered who you are, it is time to awaken others." The words struck deep, not as command, but as invitation. You knew that your story was not only yours, it was a path for others to find their own light. You understood that every chosen one becomes a mirror for those still sleeping. Your task was no longer to seek, but to serve, to walk with open eyes, to speak with truth, to love without condition. And so you took a breath, deep, steady, sacred. You stepped forward, not toward destiny, but into it. The world will still test you. There will still be storms, doubts, and dark nights. But now you know, they are not signs of failure. They are signs that you are alive in your purpose. You no longer fear the unknown. You are the unknown, becoming known through divine expression. And so, as the sun rose, you whispered once more, "I am ready. Use me, guide me, shine through me." And in that moment, everything aligned. Heaven and earth, breath and spirit, human and divine, all merged into one truth. You are not waiting for the light. You are the light. Write 333 inches, the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. For this is not the end of your story. It is the awakening of your eternity. You were never searching for God. God was always searching for you. Until you remembered you were one and the same, the chosen one has awakened, and the world will never be the same again.